The student was supposed to go to trials, but they want to.
You probably run into this 2, 4, 6, or to go to. You probably run into this a little bit when you were doing the progress records of some of your students and where they're going to be going into their classes. It's possible you might have all students that aren't changing their books. You get that as a possibility, but somewhat unlikely.
What's the next year?
So you'll want to double check and make sure that those progress
seen
records
that.
reflect which lessons they're going to
Not
be
been
going
told
into.
about
If
that
you're
one.
not too sure, please go ahead.
Some schools may use a sheet, there's a sheet where you can talk.
And just like
about
the
what
wizard
their
lessons,
lessons
all of the oceans
Is
lessons
that
are also
something we bring to the
based.
counseling?
Trails and Bridges
That
is
may
where
be something
this
that you do after the
age-based
counseling,
system
after
gets
the
all
counseling.
signed up. Depends on the school,
you.
but it still generally is first year
Depends on
junior high trails, second year junior
Some
high.
schools may not use it.
Yeah, we know.
Some schools do. They might even put it up on the wall.
Right, so
Our kids fill out
let's
something.
kind of bring the rest of the information here up to a close. Do we have any questions so far on what we've covered or the information on the simulation sheet?
Alex, I'm not familiar with the next year's goal
And
counseling sheet.
The next year's goal counseling sheet, thank you. Could I borrow that one since So this was covered in last month's counseling. So you can find this on the Chubu cabinet. If you type Ninnai Koshin into the kids section of the Chubu cabinet, this will be one of the things that you can find. This is not mandatory to be used in your actual counselings, so please check with your management staff and find out if this is going to be a tool that you'll be using, and then find out how you're going to move that into what we're practicing for today. For today, we're not going to use this directly in the actual counseling. Thank you again. If you can't find it, please send me an email, and I will send you the file directly. But it should be available on the Chubu cabinet. Any other questions so far? How many teachers here weren't entirely clear on the goals for the students, or some of the more in-depth goals? It's perfectly okay, that's not a problem. We want to definitely learn those. So let's talk about how we can learn them. Of course, the easier one is to talk with the students, do some lobby talk, but that also takes a little bit of time, and some students might be shy. So one thing that we can do is talk a little bit in a strategy meeting. So you'll want to do a strategy meeting with your managers at some point before the actual counseling. Ideally, you can do this on the day of the counseling, but when it comes to goals and things, you may want to look a little earlier to get that information. The main purpose of a strategy meeting is to discuss a strategy for the counseling, and of course to ensure smooth communication during the counseling between all of these people, the teacher, the translators, and the parents. So, to keep this smooth and simple, what do you think is something we will need to do in the counseling?
Especially because in mine, we got our list for who's going to translate for each Ninnai Koshin, and I'm going to be having my manager be the translator for some of them. So it's planning out what you're going to say in advance so that your translator knows what to say.
Exactly. So you'll definitely want to look at, again, that strategy and the approach that you're going to use, the words that you're going to use, and to make sure that you keep those words short, simple, and clear for classroom English. This will make the translator's job a lot easier, and especially, for example, with Jessica Sensei, in the case of a Ninnai Koshin counseling where it's not going to be a bilingual teacher, but a manager, we want to make sure that the manager can give the clearest message possible and not be overly confusing. So, Jessica Sensei?
In our counselling that we've done already as well, we have also the Japanese teacher giving the grammar counselling, so at the same time, so our time is like 7 minutes to give us.
You'll find this is definitely the case, especially for students that are yellow or, green or purple right now, or students that are coming twice a week. They may want to continue twice a week for those. So you'll definitely want to suss out that information during this strategy meeting to make sure that you know how much time that you have to talk, what you need to say, and how you can communicate effectively to the parents what is most important for their children, and also to get their information as well. It's very important to make sure this doesn't become a one-sided, this is why you should do this for next year, because it's very easy to tune that out. All right, so what we're going to cover. let's go over a few things. Number one, what's the first thing we cover in a counseling? Sorry, one more time? Greetings, okay, so you want to do small talk, right? During that small talk, you'll be talking about many things, but the subject material, the first thing we definitely need to cover.
How the parents think their kids doing.
Also true, we'll cover that in a little bit.
Purpose of the
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming, purpose of the counseling, we're taking some notes, these
How
are
do
good,
you
these are
feel
good.
about Eon?
Okay, how do they feel about Eon? Let's go with the strengths and weaknesses of the student. Alright, so kind of the ones that we talked up over here, the strengths and weaknesses for the student are going to be important. Also, please make sure that it doesn't become, she needs to work on listening, she's very good with vocabulary. When possible, try to give some nuance. How are they doing in class? What parts are doing very well? Well, she's really good at listening to the teacher, she follows directions, the classroom English is easy to understand, but sometimes she has some trouble listening to her friends communicate in the class. So trying to give some clear information about that listening skill is critical at this point. Next, I think Jess Sensei also started to allude to this. The next course and keeping in factors things like twice a week and grammar courses, things like that. How about one more thing? We're going to help our students by slingshotting them out to oceans. So what are we going to use? Self-study. So we want to also make sure we have the self-study recommendation very clear when we are in this strategy meeting. And then finally, we covered this again last month, possible problems and strategies to help those problems. Some of the information you should know before you go in by asking the manager things like, brain just left, 1 second, pull it back. Scheduling issues and conflicts, things like they want to take piano lessons this year, so how are we going to work with that? My son talks about English all the time, but he doesn't like to speak English outside the house. Those kinds of concerns that parents have and how we might be able to overcome them would help the parents understand that it's very natural for some of these things to occur. Right. Also, finally, closing strategies, specifically things like who explains the contracts, when are they going to be expressed, how much time do I have to talk and get the information across, am I going to stay in the room, am I going to leave, am I going to get the answer and then bring them to the manager directly, how might I get that answer? This kind of information will be very important. Like we said earlier, we're going to engage in small talk at the beginning of the counseling. So what do we do in small talk?
How are you doing?
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming, how are you doing? So we'll want to thank the parent and child for coming and then let them know why they're here, to talk about their goals, to talk about their progress, and then recommendations for study. This is also a good time to ask the parent to let you know about any concerns or questions and let them know this is kind of an open chance for them to communicate. How many parents here write actively in their club chats? A few people do, that's good, that's good. How many do you see getting kind of a stamp to show that they've read the information? Or in Japanese, yoroshiku onegai shimasu, meaning please continue to help my child. Yeah, probably a lot of those. So for this one, since they may have limited communication with you through medias like the club chats or talking if they come to Mommy Talk, and especially for blue or purple students whose parents may not necessarily come, this is a prime time for them to air out any concerns that they have. It may not happen at the beginning of the counseling, but it will happen during the counseling, and making sure they know this is an open forum is extremely important. Okay, then some things that you might say. Here's a few examples. So, who has a really good speaking voice today? No? Eric Sensei, I know you have an excellent speaking voice.
Okay.
Okay. So if you could read this first one, please.
Thank you for coming today. We are going to talk about your child's English study. I'm going to make some recommendations for your child, so please let me know honestly what you think we can make the best plan for you. Please ask me any questions you have. I want to give you good advice, and to do that, I need your input and ideas.
Nice. These are, of course, very, very basic examples covering the basic points. You can have these be more close to your method of communication, but use the same kinds of guidelines that you use for classroom English for things like Get Set. Get Set's a really solid level. Most parents have a basic understanding of English, and listening at the Get Set level should be pretty set. For higher level moms, you might actually be able to speak more directly. That will make them feel comfortable and show, hey, I'm taking into account your English skills while we're talking today. And I want you to communicate because I'm your teacher. This is the teacher for your child, and I'm here to help you out. Right, when we talk about the strengths and the things to work on, that next section, we're going to make sure that we ask the parent first how they feel their child is doing and how their English has improved. Why do we do this? Thank you, Jessica.
If the parent isn't seeing any progress, they're not going to continue. And we want the parents to see how the progress that their kid is making, and if they don't see the progress themselves, we have to be able to show it so that they can see where their kids, how kids improved over the last year.
I think this is definitely true. One of the goals for the parents is to see success for their children. It's one of the reasons why they came here, and seeing no success usually is a big damper on, well, maybe I should do this next year, or maybe I should not. So for sure, that's important. Anything else?
So it's not just a one-sided conversation of you telling the parents, your kid is doing this, your kid is doing this, your kid is doing this. It's to have to make them, like how they're doing. You also get feedback on the kid of what they're doing at home and things like that.
Exactly. So another part here is we want to make sure this does not go, it must be one-sided, or not one-sided, but two-sided, having communication lines open for both. Also, some of the parents may not have a clear idea of what their children's skills are. They've seen very limited interaction in the open houses, and they're not teachers, so they don't have may not necessarily have a really solid understanding of the skills. Oh, he doesn't speak English perfectly. Well, he's not a native speaker, but what he does at this level is a really good level. So, Jessica?
What do we do if the parent doesn't believe us?
Okay, if the parent doesn't believe you.
Yeah, I had a counselling with a child student parent, and I was like, yeah, her listening is very good, and her writing has gotten very good as well. And then I said the weaknesses, and then the parent said in Japanese, really? Like, I don't think so. Like, she thought that because we were trying to sell stuff that we was kind of just making her child better than she actually is.
Okay, so I think this is a very complicated topic to get into. The idea that your parents feel that what's being said is potentially lip service to their actual skills and abilities. This is probably a little easier to cover as we're doing the actual counseling practice, but the basic idea here for that one is that for the parents, again, that line of communication is probably broken down a little bit, and so they get the impression that they're just trying to go in for next year and do a next year's worth of classes. So we want to help the parents understand that the skills are not necessarily easily seen if you're not a teacher, and explain that in clean terms.
I would just one way also when you're preparing your information in your progress record and other things, remember to include like a sentence or an example of what the child is doing it by including that, like, well, she's improved her listening a lot. I don't have to repeat myself for her to understand the directions in the class, and she often gets the correct answers in the listening section, so she's doing a good job. Gives an example of what the child is doing, because like Sean Sensei said, they can't see in the lesson what's happening, and they may not be watching what's going on at home. So giving a clear example will lend some weight to the praise or the discussion on improvements that you have with parents.
I think it's also important to make sure that that information that you give, I think, is not cursory, giving specifics. The more specifics that are there, the more verisimilitude to your claims, the idea that the students are actually improving in these ways. But if it is very basic, I think it's easy to get that idea. So we definitely want to avoid it whenever possible. All right, let's push forward. We're going to move forward a little quickly here. The next thing you're going to do is show them the progress record. The progress record, some of them may have received it by mail at your school, they'll bring it to the counseling. Or you will be giving the progress record directly. Either way, this is the time to do it when you're talking about the strengths and weaknesses and giving them kind of a visual representation of their children's abilities overall. This, nothing says clear information like a chart with very specific lines and information on it. Then make sure that your phrasing is positive. Again, we're not looking to gloss over negative parts, but we do want to make sure that it is constructive, that students are able to learn something from it. So instead of things like, phonics was difficult, saying things like, let's work on recognizing more sounds that letters make. These were really good, but these need some more practice.
Do you have any advice on like, if you talk to your parents before on how their child's doing and they say they do something really well and it ends up that on your progress record it's like one of their weaknesses?
Oh, that's a really good question. The basic idea that we're looking for, if you have that reading right there, explain why you've put it there. So it may be that they feel, well, yeah, but they're speaking so much in class, so their speaking is high. Yes, but they're doing a lot of vocabulary speaking, but the structure speaking is a little bit, we'd like to see some more improvement in that area. Or connecting them together and using them to ask our own sentences. Here they're doing really well. In the expansion, we'd like to see some more manipulation of those points. And then how to make sure we don't say the word manipulation, and instead things like, we want the students to speak their own words, especially in that expansion section. So if you're, basically as a quick set here, if the parents' goals or the parents' views on their children's abilities do not match your own, you want to explain why you've given them that point. Because you're the teacher, that's kind of your job and position. We don't want to argue, but we do want to show what we think the students need to improve. So the same thing as in an adult lesson, don't deny the students' read on their own skills, but let them know that there are some things that as a teacher we want them to improve and focus on in certain specific ways, so that their expectations and our expectations are kind of matched. Okay. Make sure you also have a chance to give some free advice. Make sure you talk to them about the goals and their child's goals, and talk about proficiency tests. Many of our parents are interested in proficiency tests, or will be becoming more so as the next years come by, because they're going to need to have things like ACHEN 3 by the time they reach junior high school, or have things like ACHEN 2 by the time they actually start high school, and what comes with that. This is also a time where you might show them a long-term goal chart. Again, this is an optional thing, but a timeline that shows them what they can expect over the course of the next few years might be very useful. Again, Emily says that if I can borrow last month's information. This information is also located on the Chubu cabinet. You can easily find a timeline with that kind of information. So this is an optional step if it will help your parents understand what we're aiming for as we move forward. Thank you. Okay. Then next, the textbook recommendation. Make sure that you show the parents the new textbook in an engaging and interactive way, and show them what is different from their current texts. And finally, as we said before, please make sure we maintain a two-way street of communication, not make this a one-way, you must do this. An easy way to do this, ask questions. So, have you seen this book before? Do you remember, how do we practice the listening in class? How do we practice the vocabulary in class? Do you remember your son speaking for the storybook expansion? Ask those questions so that they can validate and listen, and then show them how it's going to be different. And then of course, make sure to tie the textbook into the students' goals. There are many ways to do this. We're going to practice them in detail. Any questions so far? Okay, moving on to self-study, or in this case, home study fair. Make sure that you show and demonstrate the material as time presents itself. If you don't have a lot of time, you may have to give just a, not cursory, but a brief understanding of how it works, and making sure what they're going to be finishing and doing in 3 months. Again, don't just talk at the parents. If you have enough time, please play a CD and show them the information. If your time is brief or limited, how can you show them how this is going to slingshot their child forward when they reach their next textbook? Any questions so far? I'm sorry, I know we're moving very quickly, but any quick questions? Okay, then let's move on to the next part. Making sure, again, tie the textbook to the students' goals. The idea is we're slingshotting the students forward, and this is how we're going to do it. Finally, for closing, the closing points, you're going to ask if they have any final questions and if they're interested in continuing to study at Eon. And be prepared, this is probably the time where you're going to see some of those problems show up. The parents want to listen to what the teacher has to say, but then is going to communicate some of their concerns. The closing section, if you can leave extra time here, it's really a good idea. And then finally, make sure you have a strategy for dealing with those with your translator. If the translator is a teacher, will they talk directly with the parents and suss out that information? Are you going to stay there or be available for it? These are questions you need to check when you're making a strategy meeting. Any questions so far? Okay. So from now, we are actually going to take the time to practice our counselings. We're going to do that in detail. So we will start with your older students first, the students that you have brought, like Ayano or Yurina. I think these were the ones that you wrote down. Let's use these ones to practice the counselings. You can refer in your packet towards the back of the packet, you're going to find these. This is actually the timing, and you can use this as a basic guideline as you are practicing. These are set for 20 minutes, but since you are speaking to native speakers, it will probably take less time to do so. So we're going to practice first. Let's keep our current setup. Let's have, again, across the table for practice. Across the table for practice. For Jess Sensei, I'd like you to actually work with Eric Sensei as a parent. Would that be okay, Eric Sensei?
Yeah, I can be a parent.
Thank you very much. Yes?
I'm super sorry, I really have to use the bathroom.
Okay, all right, let's take a quick 5-minute break first, and then once we finish with the 5 minutes, let's go right into practice.
Sorry,
All
guys.
right, so please take a 5-minute break.
Oh, man.
Oh, sorry.
So Sean, say,
Yes.
you're looking to do the older student, right?
Yes, so you'll go with the older student, and yes, you have copies of the materials to show them for Bridget, correct? Okay, good.
I'm really sorry to ask